Under the fading glow of the city lights, a young woman stood at the edge of everything she once called her own. Her name was Anaya, and in the quiet corners of her heart, she carried both hope and heartbreak. Life had tested her with its hardest challenge, her father's sudden illness. With no one else to turn to and no time to waste, she sold everything she had, every memory and every treasure, just to save the man who had once given her the world. The streets whispered her struggle, but she never once bent her spirit. Anaya's sacrifice wasn't just about survival, it was about love, pure and selfless. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, lived Arjun, a powerful CEO known for his cold demeanor and sharp decisions. To the world, he was untouchable, a man who valued success over sentiment and rules over relationships. But beneath that calm surface was a heart scarred by betrayal, a man who no longer believed in love. His world and Anaya's were never meant to collide, or so it seemed. Fate, however, had its own plans. A simple twist brought Anaya into Arjun's life, and what began as an unexpected meeting soon turned into something neither of them could ignore. For the first time, Arjun saw a woman whose strength wasn't built on wealth or power, but on sacrifice and devotion. And for Anaya, behind his cold eyes, she began to notice a flicker of warmth, something even he had long forgotten. But love never arrives without tests. Their worlds were too different, their scars too deep. Could a girl who gave up everything for her father find a place in the heart of a man who had closed his doors to everyone? Could sacrifice truly turn into love, or was this bond destined to break under the weight of reality? The answer lies in what comes next, as their story unfolds in ways neither of them could ever have imagined. Anaya's life had always been simple. She grew up in a modest home where laughter filled the rooms even when money was short. Her father was her guiding light, a man who worked tirelessly to give her every chance in life. When his illness struck, it was as if the ground beneath her feet gave way. The doctors spoke of treatments that carried a heavy price, and though she had nothing to offer, she never once hesitated. Piece by piece, she let go of her belongings, her books, her jewelry, even the tiny home that had held so many memories. Each sale was like tearing away a piece of her soul, but she never allowed herself to cry. Her father's life meant more than her own comfort. On the other side, Arjun's past painted him into the man the world feared. He had built his empire from nothing, facing betrayal from those closest to him. Every deal, every decision had taught him to close his heart tighter, to trust no one. To his employees, he was the perfect CEO, strict, ambitious, unstoppable. But to himself, he was a man who had lost faith in love and loyalty. It was this very wall around him that kept everyone at a distance. When Anaya stepped into his world, she did not arrive as someone seeking his favor. Instead, she came carrying an honesty that unsettled him. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or power. In fact, she hardly seemed to notice it. Her quiet strength and her willingness to endure pain for the sake of someone she loved shook the coldness he wore like armor. Yet, between them lay questions neither dared to ask. Could a woman who had given up everything still have the courage to open her heart again? And could a man who no longer believed in love risk letting someone in? Their paths were now entwined, but the road ahead was filled with shadows neither of them could yet see. ChatGPT said, Arjun found himself thinking about Anaya more often than he wished. She was unlike anyone he had ever met in his carefully guarded world. Most people who came close to him wanted something, his money, his position, his influence. But she carried none of that hunger. Instead, she bore the weight of sacrifice, a story written in her eyes that lingered long after she walked away. It unsettled him because it reminded him of the man he used to be before the betrayals, before his heart turned to stone. For Anaya, meeting Arjun was nothing short of a storm she hadn't expected. She had never imagined her path crossing with a man who held such power. At first, she resisted his presence. She saw him as cold, distant, unreachable. Yet there were moments when his silence seemed to hide more pain than arrogance. Sometimes, when she caught his gaze softening, She wondered if there was more to him than the ruthless CEO everyone spoke about. But the world around them was not kind. Arjun's board of directors, sharp-eyed and calculating, did not welcome the idea of him being distracted by a woman who came from nothing. To them, Anaya was a weakness, a distraction that could tarnish his empire. Rumors began to spread, whispers that she had come into his life for her own gain. Those whispers grew louder, threatening her dignity. Arjun into an impossible corner. At the same time, Anaya faced her own inner battles. She had promised herself to focus only on her father's recovery, yet her heart betrayed her with every glance toward Arjun. She knew stepping closer to him could mean stepping into a world filled with scrutiny, judgment, and secrets she wasn't prepared for. Still, something about him pulled her in, even as danger circled quietly around them both. And somewhere between their growing bond and the shadows pressing in, a question loomed. Was their connection strong enough to survive the storm waiting just beyond the horizon? The distance between Anaya and Arjun grew heavier with every passing day, not because of what they felt, but because of everything standing in their way. Arjun's world was built on sharp edges, business rivalries, endless power struggles, and people who waited for the smallest crack to pull him down. And Anaya, with her unshakable honesty, was becoming that crack in the eyes of those who envied him. One evening, Arjun found himself in a board meeting where his closest advisors questioned him directly. They threw her name on the table like an accusation, claiming that a woman who had sold everything for her father could just as easily sell his secrets. Arjun clenched his jaw, torn between defending her and protecting his empire. He remained silent, but his silence was enough to plant a seed of doubt in everyone's mind, including Anaya's. Anaya, too, was fighting her own storm. Whispers followed her wherever she went, at the hospital corridors where she cared for her father, and even in the places she thought were safe. People questioned her intentions, and though she tried to remain strong, the weight of judgment pressed hard on her. The one man she had begun to trust seemed distant, trapped in battles she couldn't see, battles he wouldn't share with her. And just when she thought things couldn't get harder, the past returned like a shadow. Someone from Arjun's life, someone who had once betrayed him, resurfaced with secrets that could shatter everything. That person knew about Anaya, and they were determined to use her as the weapon to break him completely. Every choice now carried dangerous consequences. If Arjun chose her, he risked his empire. If Anaya stayed, she risked losing herself to a world that was never hers. The air between them grew thick with unspoken words, with feelings too strong to deny, yet too dangerous to embrace. And as the night closed in, it became clear. Something was about to break. The question was not if, but when, and who would pay the price. Just when the tension between Anaya and Arjun reached its breaking point, another storm arrived, one neither of them could have predicted. Anaya discovered that her father's illness was not just a matter of fate. It was connected to a business scandal that had quietly unfolded years ago. A company under Arjun's empire had once been linked to faulty medicines, and though Arjun himself had never known, his signature rested on contracts that tied his name to the tragedy. The realization struck Anaya like a knife. The man she was slowly falling for, the man she had begun to trust, might have unknowingly played a part in the very suffering that had cost her everything. When she confronted him, her voice shook with both anger and disbelief. Arjun, stunned, denied ever knowing such details, but his world began to crumble under the weight of evidence placed before him. For a man who built his life on control, the possibility that his empire had harmed the very people he claimed to protect was unbearable. His enemies seized this moment, feeding Anaya's doubts and spreading rumors faster than he could contain them. Arjun faced two wars now, one outside, against those who sought to destroy him, and one inside, against the walls closing in around his heart. And Anaya stood at the center, torn between love and betrayal. Was she simply a pawn in a larger game? Or was fate forcing her to choose between her father's suffering and the man whose touch had already left a mark on her soul? The stakes had never been higher. Their story was no longer just about sacrifice or love. It was about survival, truth, and the price of choices that could never be undone. And as the night deepened, the line between enemy and ally blurred, leaving them both teetering on the edge of a revelation that could destroy everything. The storm finally broke on the night when truth refused to hide any longer. Arjun stood before his board and the world, accused of being the man behind the scandal that had shattered lives, including Anaya's. For once, he did not try to fight with power or influence. Instead, he chose honesty. He laid bare the documents, the mistakes buried in contracts he had once signed without question. He admitted his blind trust had been used against him and revealed the name of the one person who orchestrated it all, the very betrayer who had resurfaced to tear him apart. The revelation shook the room. The traitor had been close to Arjun all along, manipulating not only his empire, but also the evidence that pushed Anaya to doubt him. With the truth exposed, the enemy's mask crumbled and the pieces of their plan scattered. But for Arjun, the real battle was not in the boardroom. It was with Anaya. He found her waiting, torn between heartbreak and hope. Her father's illness had been worsened by the faulty medicines, and forgiving the man who unknowingly stood at the center of it was no simple choice. Yet when she looked at him, she no longer saw the ruthless CEO or the victim of betrayal. She saw a man willing to stand vulnerable, to take responsibility, and to fight for something greater than power. In that moment, Anaya chose not with anger, but with the same courage that had once driven her to sacrifice everything. She stepped toward him, not because the pain vanished, but because she realized love was not about perfection. It was about truth and endurance. But just as their hands touched, a final twist revealed itself. The very empire Arjun had saved now demanded a price. To protect Anaya from further attack, he would have to step down, giving up the throne he had built his life upon. Their love was real, but the question remained: could it survive a future where the world they knew no longer existed? The story closed on their embrace, leaving destiny's next move hanging in silence. The day of reckoning arrived faster than either of them expected. Arjun had already decided to step down as CEO, a choice that sent shockwaves through his empire. To the world it looked like defeat, but to him, it was the price of protecting Anaya and finally reclaiming his humanity. The boardroom that once echoed with his authority now felt strangely silent as he signed the papers that ended his reign. But in that silence was freedom, the kind he had never known before. For Anaya, the moment was bittersweet. Her father was finally on the path to recovery, thanks to treatments funded not by charity, but by Arjun's personal sacrifice. She saw the man who had once been untouchable give up everything he had built, not for pride, but for love. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that love could truly rise from sacrifice. The city buzzed with news of the fallen CEO, but Arjun and Anaya found peace in a life that wasn't defined by wealth or status. Their bond grew stronger in the quiet moments, her laughter filling the spaces where his silence once lived, his strength steadying her when doubts returned. It seemed as though the storm had finally passed, but destiny had one last twist. Just when they thought the battle was over, Arjun received a letter, an offer from an international firm, not to lead as a CEO, but to testify against a global network tied to the very scandal that had nearly destroyed him. Accepting would mean stepping back into the fire, risking not only his new life with Anaya, but also their fragile future. Refusing would keep them safe, but leave justice incomplete. As Arjun read the letter aloud, Anaya reached for his hand. The love that had grown from sacrifice was now faced with its greatest test. And while they stood together, ready to face whatever came next, the world waited. Was their story about to end in peace? Or was this only the beginning of a new war? Arjun sat with the letter in his hands for a long time, the weight of it heavier than any deal he had ever signed. This time, though, he wasn't alone. Anaya sat beside him, her fingers wrapped around his as if to remind him that whatever choice he made, he would never have to face it in silence again. She looked at him with the same steady courage that had carried her through sacrifice after sacrifice, and in her eyes, he found his answer. He chose not out of duty to his past, but for the future he wanted to build. Arjun accepted the offer, not as the powerful CEO the world once feared, but as a man determined to set things right. It was no longer about saving an empire. It was about protecting people like Anaya, her father, and countless others who had once paid the price of corruption. The journey was not easy. The hearings were long, the truths painful, and the fight against a global network tested every ounce of strength they had left. But together, they endured. Each step of justice became a step toward healing, and slowly, the scars of betrayal began to fade. Anaya's father, now recovering, lived to see his daughter smile again, and that smile carried more worth than all the riches Arjun had ever known. When the dust finally settled, they returned not to a palace or a boardroom, but to a quiet life of their own making. Their story had been one of loss, sacrifice, betrayal, and love, yet through it all, they discovered that love built on truth could survive anything. And as the sun set over the city that once tested them both, Anaya and Arjun walked hand in hand, leaving behind titles and,